Good evening, students. So, I'm Indranuj, and once again, I am back with my new video. And you have started watching my channel. And after dealing with the poem Ode to the West Wind, a soulful poetic composition by P.B. Shelley, the great romantic poet, now it is time for some work of fiction. Fiction, novel, whichever term we, uh, we can use to denote this particular genre of literature, it remains the same. And right now, I would be dealing with Victorian novel or Victorian fiction. And the Victorian period, as we know, was it was actually rich. It is actually rich in the novels written by the great Victorian novelists, and the romantic novels, for example, by Jane Austen, Walter Scott, they were also the social novels. There were the elements of social drama, then political tensions, family life, fashionable society, aristocratic society, the novel of manners, love, emotion, each and everything which has to be there to construct a perfect plot for a novel. All these things were there in the Romantic Age. But the Victorian novels, they are unique in the sense that for the first time in history, the social problem, the social reality not as it should be, but reality as it is, the brutal reality, the ground reality. This reality has been brought to the fore in the novels by the Victorian authors, the Victorian novelists. The social novel or the social problem novel, as we can say. So, gender, race, class prejudice, caste prejudice, then tendency to rebel against the existing social customs, and a tendency to highlight the problems which actually pricked the existence of human beings to a great extent. Things which complicated the existence of human beings, like poverty, the conditions in factories and mines, the plight of child labor. And child labor was, remember, an alarming factor responsible for the loss of innocence, the loss of childhood, and sometimes the loss of lives of many young children, say of the age below 14 or 15. They were they were manhandled by the masters. They were tortured to such an extent that some of them had to quit their lives. Some of them committed suicide, while some of them died of poverty and starvation. And then violence against women and rising criminality. And obviously, the violence against women is a great instance of criminality. How women were treated as objects of lust, and how the factory, and yes, the conditions in factories, the working conditions, the social and political scenario prevailing in the social and economic scenario prevailing in the factories. Besides such children, besides child labor, women were also engaged in labor in those factories, and they were occasionally treated as sex slaves by the masters. Yes, right. They were treated as commodities. They were used by the masters uh, for doing the manual labor in the factories. They were tortured, harassed brutally, and they were utilized by the masters, the factory owners, to do certain course in the industrial belt. Means their physical strength, their physical powers were utilized for assistance in the factory work. At the same time, they were consumed by the factory owners, the masters. After they were done with their work, they were treated as slaves. Slaves of what? Sex slaves. They were lustfully used by the masters. So, and criminality, and also the criminality. Naturally, when people are tortured, they are brutally tortured for days. Then, out of protest, a sense of protest rises in some of them, in most of them, and this turned some of the factory workers, mainly the children, say who were orphaned at a very young age, who lost their parents, who were tortured brutally. They gradually turned into criminals, and they actually, in the meantime, with the passage of time rather, they started to steep into the world of crimes, committing the acts of theft, dacoity, or even murder. They gradually turned into outlaws. Sometimes, most of the times, the children, that this tendency was seen in children, but sometimes women also. If we go back to one of the novels, Moll Flanders. I hope you have heard this name, Moll Flanders, by Daniel Defoe. So this novel is a striking instance of how Moll Flanders, the central character, the female protagonist, she turned into a criminal after she was tortured to the means she was brutally hammered by the society in all aspects, in terms of physical violence, in terms of she had also failed marriages repeated number of times. She had gone through failed marriages. She was raped. She was sold as slave to various factories, and this Moll Flanders, the central character, gradually turned into a criminal with the passage of time. A beautiful novel. You can read it if you get a chance, or at least you can Google down and see what it is. So that is the beginning of social problem novels. Right. Okay. So now let us begin the social problem novels in the Victorian age. So the social novel, also known as the social problem or social protest novel, is a work of fiction in which a prevailing social problem such as gender, race, or class prejudice is dramatized through its effects on the characters of a novel. More specific examples of social problems that are addressed in such works include poverty, conditions in factories and mines, the plight of child labor, violence against women, rising criminality, and epidemics because of overcrowding and poor sanitation in cities. Not only the social exploitation of the poor people, but there was also the problem of overcrowding and poor sanitation in cities due to industrialization. With the advent of industrialization in the Victorian age, more and more people in search of a secured livelihood left the villages, the rural areas, and fled to the cities. And what happened then? As a result of overcrowding, the cities gradually turned into slums. Slums mushroomed in some particular areas of the cities, and this led to overcrowding, starvation, and poor sanitation in those areas. So, terms like thesis novel, propaganda novel, industrial novel, working class novel, these are also used to denote the social problem novels. Industrial novel, obviously, working class, these novels mostly deal with the working class. We would gradually find when we would study about Charles Dickens. Then propaganda novel, a sort of social protest. The idea of social change has been emphasized in these Victorian social problem novels. These novels are also known as proletarian novels, coming from the proletariat, the marginalized section of the society, who are being placed at the bottom of the social pyramid and at the mercy of the hierarchical upper caste, the bourgeois. So, the proletariat section is literally oppressed by the bourgeois, and this resulted in a sort of social protest, a sort of social and political protest against the ruling class. So, hence the term proletarian novel. So, this is another term which is used to denote the social problem novels in the Victorian age. And this is all about the introduction to the social problem novels. I hope by now you have got a fair enough idea of what the social problem novels actually are and what they actually deal with. And I would be dealing with 4 authors, means not 4, I would be dealing with 6 authors of the social problem novels. And if there is any more author, then I would mention. So Charles Dickens, the name which immediately comes to our mind when we think of Victorian novels, right? Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, George Eliot, and the Bronte sisters, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, and Anne Bronte. So Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, George Eliot, and the Bronte sisters. We would be dealing with these important novelists of the Victorian age. And in my next video, I would start this section with the renowned Victorian novelist Charles Dickens. So that's all for today. Hope you have understood and enjoyed this lecture. So thank you so much.